Welcome to another edition of the Dakotan's Election Central, where we are comprehensively covering the 2024 North Dakota election cycle. Today, I am joined by the incumbent from the District 38 in Minot, House of Representatives, Dan Ruby. Thank you for joining us today, Dan.
Yeah, thanks. It's great to be here.
Absolutely. So before we jump into the politics and stuff like that, take us back a few years to before you initially ran and kind of what inspired you to make that leap into politics?
Well, I don't know if it was an inspiration. I was always interested in more national politics, listening to talk radio. I was on the trucks all the time with our company, and so when I wasn't out throwing garbage, I was in the cab and listening to talk radio, generally Rush Limbaugh, and I would find local talk shows that also were different than my views, but
right.
So I would try to formulate and basically be able to defend my positions more based on what people were saying and to formulate those. So that was kind of always a part of what I was interested in, and I was kind of considered somewhat of a political junkie in that way.
All right.
Didn't follow the local state stuff very much, other than when it was time to vote, and I always liked voting in the primaries and in the general. I like to vote on the election day. I don't like to do the early or absentee. And so when there was an opening, I guess, in our district, I wasn't a member of the district at that time, hadn't joined, didn't know who they were.
Right.
Found out that our business attorney at the time was the district chairman.
Okay.
And he called and asked me to consider running for the legislature. And I thought, well, must be other people looking to get into this. You know, you think that there's this pool of people that want to do this, but I found out from that experience that most districts are scrambling to try find candidates that are willing to do that and spend the time and get involved in that level. I also didn't think I was known by very many people, and that I wouldn't. I also said I didn't go to college.
Okay.
So, I mean, what would my qualifications for that be? And they said, well, you run a business, you know what it's like to sign the front of the check. Yeah. And you have a family, so you understand the family issues. You've lived here for your whole life, and they said people do know who you are. So it was kind of all that. And I think our system has always been designed to allow the average person to serve. Right. You know, you're willing to learn, you're willing to get in and work hard. Our system is set up for anybody to get involved. You don't have to have a certain degree, you don't have to have a certain pedigree or anything. It's the citizens that govern, and that's the beauty of it.
It's an interesting thing. So let's just jump right into the fire and talk term limits, because you mentioned and I think a lot of people feel that way, that there's this pool of people that are just chomping at the bit to get in. And probably that's magnified by the now presidential races that we see, where you have candidates that are now being left off the stage because there's so many of them. And so we imagine that's the way it's going on in districts across North Dakota, and it's not. And of course, with term limits, it's limiting people to run 8 years or less. You can't exceed 8 years now in an elected one side of the Congress, in one house or the other. How do you see that affecting districts like District 38 or districts across North Dakota as we start seeing the experienced people? You've been in since you were elected in 2000. You've been in for a few years. We start seeing that experience not being able to run for a re-election. How do you see that affecting some of these districts across North Dakota?
I think some districts are going to see a real struggle. And I thought most would, but I do think that in some areas, certainly in some of the more urban districts where the population is more condensed, we may see several people that come out just because they aren't going to be challenging an incumbent. And I think we see that with a couple of the districts here in Minot now, where there's some open spots. Yeah. So I think that may help. But there's some rural districts that haven't been able to find candidates when they were all open. And after redistricting, we had some that were open because they were new districts. So nobody was in there, and they still, maybe only one side or the other, got candidates to run in those districts. So I think it's going to be very difficult because, and I think most people, I kind of thought, especially for Congress, you have the Pelosi's and some of them that have been there forever, and you think, there should be some kind of a limit. Right. When I first got elected to the House, I didn't think about it at the state level, but I was very thankful for the people that had served longer than me, that institutional knowledge that they had about why things were changed to make workers' comp fund stable and the unemployment fund stable, because they were insolvent before. And so they would explain to us what changes they made and how they were able to do that. So you'd learn from that.
Right.
Some of the tax issues, or agency promises that if you gave them this much funding, they'd accomplish this. And some of those that had been there a while could catch them on that and say, wait a minute, in this session you said if we give you this much money, you'll be able to cut your FTEs and that type of stuff. And so I relied a lot on that institutional knowledge, and it showed me that is a good thing. And I think the problem, of course, with term limits is if you have a candidate that you really like and want to keep in there, you don't have the choice. So you do lose some choice for the voters on who they would like to have as their representative. And I didn't oppose it because of me, because I wasn't going to be there that much longer anyway. I didn't figure, another term. I probably have stayed in longer than I would have, just because my son got in the legislature and we get to serve together.
That's a neat thing.
That was added a lot of fun and to watch him work and see how he interacted with the people and how they, I'd get compliments all the time. Boy, he's really asking some good questions. He's handling himself well. So just being able to spend that time and share that experience that we both have an interest in is I would say what kept me in a little longer than I would have been. But so I thought, well, now the term limits is up. When it went in effect, I only had 6 years after that. So I served out. Well, this is the last two of the other term, and then one more 4-year term.
Right.
And then
people in your position got robbed the most because it went in effect midterm for you guys.
Yes.
So you only get to be reelected once. You only get to serve 6 years under that rather than the full 8.
And the other issue is when my longtime running mate Larry Ballou stepped out. There's probably only 10 or 11 months left in his term,
right? And
that would put somebody over to run in a second term, so they can't. So they basically would only serve 5 years.
This was a question that
not even
I had in my mind that came up the other day. Is like, it's going to really demotivate, discourage people from wanting to fill in seats. You won't want to do it.
Yep.
Because it ruins your chances of being in there for 2 terms. It seems like to effectively do how it was put in place, not commenting on whether it's good or not, it should be 10 years because you can't be elected for a 2-year term. So it allows you to fill in if necessary, fill out, your full, for the people that were already in office, they could fill out 2 full terms or whatever, rather than the 8 years where you can't exceed it.
Well, and the main thing that I would tell people, if having an incumbent is too high of a hurdle to beat an incumbent, which is not true. It happens all the time. But if that's the big issue, then if we had, say, a 12-year, or even an 8, but if we had a 12-year and then they had to step out for 1 term, then they would, if people wanted them, they could come back. This is a lifetime cap. That was the other issue I had with it. It's really rigid. We have people in their 20s. They'll be 8 years in the House. They could jump over to the Senate for another 8, and they're done for life. That's silly because they may get out and at some time when they're closer to retirement or retired, decide to get back involved because now they have a lot more experiences and they have more time. Yeah, a lot of young people will get out because of family. They start a family or a career that won't allow them to run. So then they'll get back into it when they're older, and that will be not possible.
We have part-time legislators in North Dakota. It's not a full-time deal, so it breeds that if you're in your 30s in the middle of your career or you're trying to get to the next level, it's really difficult to take off 4 months from that job and say, oh yeah, I'm going to just not be involved for the next 4 months as I go to Bismarck. And that's going to happen every 2 years. Are you fine with that? Can I still get those promotions? That's difficult.
Yeah. And it is, we are in only every other year, which means that we're going to have people who are in their 3rd or 4th session being chairman of appropriations and majority leader and minority leader, all the high positions that take a while to learn to really know what you're doing there.
Yeah.
I think what it's going to do is it's going to spur an eventual change to annual sessions, which then takes us out of the citizen legislature to some extent, not completely, but to some extent.
And I, not wanting to spend all the time on this subject, but it is an interesting one. Definitely more conversation that could be had on it. There was a question I was going to ask, and it just slipped my mind. But I think that, it's the fact that, does it push, like I was talking with Senator Hogue about the legacy fund, and that's something that he spurred on early on in his career. But it almost pushes away from legislation like that, because you're not thinking long term. You're thinking of, what can I do in the next 8 years that's going to provide the results that I want to see in North Dakota. Mm-hmm. Do you feel like having that cap on there makes it where you're not as visionary because you're not thinking of the long-term picture as much?
Well, that and the time to work on changes, because we've worked on trying to get away from the defined benefit package to go to defined contribution for probably 14 years, maybe if not more. I mean, it's been something that we've had it before us multiple times, and sometimes we're close to getting it, but we just passed it this last session, which took a long time. So
that's interesting.
Just having the people that are going to work on that over time, and maybe they don't bring it in every session, but they're working on it. They're finding out the numbers. They're refining it to a point where everybody understands. The projection of the defined benefit was insolvent, and we were kept having to resupplement that to even try to get it not even close, really, just trying to put a patch on it. And so now we have the system in place that eventually will keep the promise of everybody that was under that and paid into that, so that they'll be held harmless. And then from there on, everybody's on what I think is a better policy anyway. Almost all businesses are in either a simple IRA or a 401k.
Okay.
And that's the type of system that it'll be.
Gotcha. But it took 14 years.
At least, yeah.
At least 14 years. And so that continuity was important. We've jumped right into the heat of some of the hot topic issues in North Dakota. But step away from politics for a moment. We find you on a Saturday afternoon. You're relaxing at the lake. Well, tell us a little bit about Dan Ruby away from politics.
Well, a lot of times, not on a Saturday necessarily anymore, but a lot of Saturdays I was working because we have a family company, and I was the second generation, and now some of my kids are in the third generation.
That's neat.
My wife and I have been married for 40 years. We have 10 children.
That's awesome.
And now 19 grandchildren. So,
congratulations.
If I'm lucky, I'm enjoying the lake with one of the grandkids or several grandkids, either pulling them in the boat on the tubes or teaching them to hopefully getting them up on skis. Yeah. Maybe doing a little fishing.
All right.
That's what we like to do in the summertime, and I hunt with them. We go to watch them at swimming, skating, gymnastics,
wrestling,
softball, wrestling. Yeah, it's another one. And I spend a lot of miles and hours watching my boys wrestle. So now, not as many. Well, I don't have as many grandsons as I do granddaughters. So we don't see as much of the wrestling. And they're just in Pee Wee yet. But so it's that is, and a lot of times it's me throwing a throwing dummy for my dog and having him jump off the dock and get it, because that's what we enjoy doing. And then my wife and I'll spend some time on the pontoon and enjoy the lake. But
you enjoy hunting? I
do, yeah. Pheasant hunting and deer hunting are two that I go do pretty much most of the time. But I'll hunt when it's hunting season. I enjoy yard work. I enjoy a little bit of stuff on working on the house or something like that. But most of the time it's either trailing around for grandkids or, my wife and I getting out and spending some time together. We do a little traveling, but not a huge amount. But
never enough traveling.
Right.
So what are you? Obviously, District 38's in a race, and stuff like that. But over your time in the House, what have you found, or what have you done that has helped keep you feel like you're closely connected to the constituents in your district? So when you're in Bismarck, you feel like you're fighting for issues that they care about, that are on their minds.
Well, mainly putting in bills on their behalf, or when we're not in session, I get calls where people ask me to look into something, so I'll call an agency and get information. Sometimes it shouldn't, but sometimes it helps when a legislator is making a call on their behalf. But sometimes it's just a process they're not understanding, and I help to figure out so that I can explain it in a way that the agencies maybe don't, because they deal with that all the time. They're not the layperson that's trying to have it explained. But so it's the constituent service like that I enjoy the most, and I do put in bills on behalf of people that sometimes are not even in my district. I had somebody from Fargo and somebody from Dickinson last time that I put bills in for. They heard about me and called and wanted to know if I would help them out. And so, that's a rewarding part for me. There's some frustrations with it all, trying to get, people to understand and see it the way you want. And sometimes people misunderstand what they hear in the news or something. So you try to change their view on that by contacting them. But I do enjoy it, helping people. And when I've put in bills that have, for instance, the local winery in my district, we started out many years ago making some changes to convert our license from more of a hobby to an actual viable business.
Gotcha.
And we've succeeded in that.
Wow.
And
so real life things, not just the big issues that you hear about, like term limits, Yeah.
I put in a bill last session, second time, to allow a business owner to start a cigar lounge. Okay. And that took, one guy put that in before I did, which I told him it was too soon before the cap. When it was initiated measure for the smoking law, you have 7 years before the legislature can change it with a simple majority. Otherwise, it has to be a 2/3. So I put it in twice. We got it passed this last session, and so now if somebody wants to start a cigar lounge, and there's a lady down in Mandan that does, they can start to do that. So just simple things like that.
What are some of the moments that you look back and you're like, that's something that I'm proud of, that I'm really thankful that I was able to be a part of in your time?
Well, for me, definitely, I was staunch pro-life when I came in. So I started putting in bills for that. And I got to be known almost statewide for being the pro-life legislator or whatever. But there were several others. There were a couple ladies that came in, Betty Grandy and Yana Murdahl, who were with Concerned Women of America, and then became a senator, worked very hard on a lot of that stuff. So they moved on and were actually more successful in some of the bills they put in, but I'm hoping that maybe I set the groundwork, some foundation for it, because that was an important issue. And to be in the legislature at the time that the Supreme Court overruled Roe versus Wade was really, really rewarding for me. But as I said, the change for the defined benefit was definitely one. Yeah. That was a key thing that took a long time to get to, and I don't know that I was real instrumental in that, other than being there to vote. Right. And maybe make the case to the public when it came up in Saturday forums that we had during session, and those kind of things. But it's so those are some of the big ones, I guess. But there's more. Some of the funding we had for infrastructure during the oil boom, and that was critical for safety and for the political subdivisions like the townships and counties, the cities. They were just way stressed out because of the impacts. Right. And so those were key things that we had to do. And certainly with the flooding, and I remember we had, working on the flooding of Devil's Lake and getting an outlet for that. And then, certainly Fargo and Grand Forks, that was probably a little before Some of the Grand Forks one, I think, might have been a little before I got in, but with Fargo, they came up with their the diversion plan, and they needed funding for that, and so they've been working on that too. So, and then certainly Minot was
right.
Good portion. Burlington was hit first in my district for the most part, and then from there, in between Burlington and Minot, and then certainly our northwest part of our district in the Minot.
It's a great example of where experience is important, though, because you mentioned the other places in the state that was affected, and so you begin to get a roadmap of how they dealt with it, how you dealt with it as you were alongside with them as they're going through it. Where we're gonna lose that, and I don't know. I'm to people curious. I'm in between on it. I'm torn on term limits. I understand the value, and I understand the regrets of it too, because I'm worried about the state. So about that, what do you see some of the issues facing North Dakota in the coming years?
Well, I guess before I go on to that, some of the changes with the term limits, you're going to have people that will, maybe the public will decide that there's, they need to change that and go back. It's going to be very difficult to go back and change that, but that's a possibility that might happen.
Yeah.
And whether or not people see it, because there's pros and cons to it. I see by some people's mindset, but when you look at the Senate right now, with just the people that have announced they're not running, it's about like 17 to 19% of the senators are already going to be gone. Has nothing to do with term limits because it hasn't kicked in yet. So I don't know where the problem was. I know there's a few outliers like myself that have stayed in much longer, but the average House member, I think, was 8 years, which is what the term limits is. So you didn't need the term limits to do it. It's just you'll lose some of the people that are, there's some that get out right away, of course. That's what gets that average to 8. But some people were at, 12 and 16 and 20 and that type of stuff. So that's where you would retain some of that institutional knowledge that I think is going to be harmful to the state. But so that's going to be something the state's going to face, certainly.
Right.
Minot will still be dealing with the flood protection funding and plans for some time. So that is definitely going to be something that we'll be working on. I think when I first got elected, our big issue was how do we keep young people in the state? They go off to college, they get educated, and they don't come back.
Right.
And that hasn't been as much of a problem now because there's so many opportunities for good-paying jobs. It's just that we have less kids, and we have less. The trend is people having less children.
Right.
So now we're going to have a lot of K through 12 schools struggling. Just announced that Minot's going to have less than it projected when the bond issue was passed, so that's kind of a frustration.
Right.
And then our universities. We have 11 universities. It's in the Constitution. We have to change the Constitution to not fund them.
Wow.
And there's been some attempts to do that in the past that have always failed. So we're going to have a lot more capacity than we have bodies to put in them. So that's going to be an issue.
It's relatively easy to get something initially passed, amending the state constitution. It's difficult to revise it because, take term limits, for example, everybody gets behind the idea of, I think term limits is a good thing. So they vote yes. But now we find out maybe 8 years is too short. We should get that to 12. Well, now there's a lot of discussion about the actual thing. Mm-hmm. Do you think there should be discussion about changing how easy it is to make an amendment to the state constitution?
Yeah, I've supported a higher bar, whether it was a higher percentage of voter approval or whether it took more signatures or, there was one proposal I really liked that and somebody told me it was working in either Nevada or Arizona where it actually had to pass twice by the voters.
Gotcha.
And what we did is we had a proposal to do that, and the one thing that was put into it is that if it passed the first time and the legislature said, you know what, we really agree with this is a good thing, and voted for it, it didn't have to go to a second vote.
Gotcha.
But people still, then the opponents of any change to that said, well, this is giving veto control to the legislature. And it had nothing to do with veto control. It was actually a fast track to get that measure in place if we so chose, which people could talk to us about doing, rather than waiting to the next two.
Second time.
For the next. And how it was explained to me was that where they had it the first time this measure passed, and in the next 2 years, after more consideration, more information, the voters said, it's not as good as we thought it was.
Right.
And so it gave a little bit more time to reflect on the effects that it might have. I didn't think that was a bad thing, and I thought it was a good idea to have the legislature be able to fast track it if it was really good and not have to go to the second vote. But that wasn't the perception that was pushed during the opposition campaigning.
Because what can happen is there can be outside interest groups that come and push some of these things, and term limits. I don't have the full research in front of me, so I can't speak directly towards it. But I know that there is outside groups that are targeting states of this would be an easy state to get term limits established in, so they can continue to get the ball rolling. And obviously, their goal is probably to get in all 50 states. So it protects you a little bit against that, where they have to spend a little more money, spend a little more time if they're actually going to get an amendment to the Constitution. So it seems like something like that would be a good thing. Do you feel we're a heavy energy state? We're blessed with a lot of natural resources. Is there a balance that we need to find with our energy and development along with environmental concerns? Oh,
absolutely. In our Department of Environmental Quality that we have in the state, used to be part of the Department of Health, which then it was carved out. I deal with them a lot because I own a landfill, and they regulate that as well under EPA guidelines, and then what the state rules are. So I'm in touch with them all the time, and I know that how serious they are with everything. I mean, the amount of provisions they put in to almost redundancies sometimes to protect the water. There could be spills. Certainly there are.
Right.
But boy, they jump quick and they know how to mitigate it. And I think they've done a good job in doing that. Some of the reclamation, certainly with the coal, it's phenomenal. I mean, you go by some of those areas where they've dug out the coal, you have no idea that it's ever been disturbed.
Right.
And
absolutely.
They do mapping and all that of all the topography, and wherever there was a pond or whatever, it's put back exactly the way it was.
Yeah.
So with that's coal. That's one of the energies. I guess we'll wait and see, because we haven't had too many wind farms that have been decommissioned. So hopefully that between the Public Service Commission, which I think regulates them, will make sure that things, if one is decommissioned and they move on, that the land is put back the way it should.
Right.
There's some old oil wells that were put in before some of this. We use some funds from the federal government to go towards capping those and putting the land back the way it was as best we can. So I think the state does a good job with that, and I applaud them for it. The agencies that work on that, I think they do a good job.
Absolutely. This has been a fun interview so far, but it's time to liven it up a little bit.
Okay.
Let's get some rapid fire questions. We'll ask you a question. You give us an answer. It can be one word. You can add an explanation if you'd like. It's totally up to you. But we got a few of them here for you. So let's start it off easy. What's your favorite book?
My favorite book? I would say one of the 4 that I read from James Herriot in the All Creatures Great and Small.
All right.
Series.
Very good. If you could have dinner with any historical figure, who would it be?
Well, Jesus, as long as it wasn't the Last Supper.
Yeah. I'd have to be careful about putting your hand into the dish there.
Yes,
yeah. What's your hidden talent?
Oh, hidden talent. Dad jokes.
Dad jokes. There we go.
I don't know if it's hidden.
Yeah. Sometimes it's a little too evident. If you could live in any time period, past or future, when would it be?
Oh boy. I
Definitely not the 30s.
No. I mean, I don't know that I just soon live now.
Hey, that's a good answer.
Yeah.
Some people don't appreciate the now as much as they should.
No, people who are, by our standards, poor are wealthy by standards from centuries ago.
That's fair.
So
it's a good answer.
Just indoor plumbing is
that's reason enough.
Yep.
Reason enough right there. Coffee or tea?
Coffee.
What's the best piece of advice you've ever received? This one's a hard one.
It is. I would say to be honest. My parents taught me that, and my mom was real adamant about that. If you're honest, you don't have to try to remember what you said.
Yeah, that's a good principle.
And I've used that in business too, where you deal with a lot of different customers. We deal with a lot of cities, and it's a lot easier to go to them and not have to try remember that something you might have said that was not truthful.
That's good. If you could have any animal as a pet, what would it be?
Oh, definitely a dog.
Definitely a dog.
Yeah. I don't suffer from any mental health issues like PTSD, but I definitely get a lot of contentment from having a dog near me. I had a black lab for I've had several black labs, but I had a chocolate lab that was always with me. And then when I had to put her down, I might have. My wife said I was in depression, but I was always looking for her to follow, and then my wife eventually bought me a yellow lab, which now has kind of I get a lot of satisfaction with him even when we're not hunting. That's good. He's just a fun. Neat. So that definitely would be a dog.
What's your favorite hobby?
I would say it'd have to be hunting.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
That's good. What's the most adventurous thing you've ever done?
Oh boy, adventurous. I can't think of anything.
Maybe it's joining the House of Representatives. That's pretty adventurous.
Well, yeah, to some extent, that was so out of what I ever thought I would ever be doing.
Yeah.
When I get out of the vehicle in the parking lot and I'm walking up to the Capitol and I look up, it still is in awe to me that I'm actually being able to go there to be a part of that.
It's so neat that you're able to do that with your son too.
Yes, yeah. Well, when he was still in high school and said you have to stay in long enough for me to serve, I thought there's so many things, timing, what district are you going to be in? So you're going to be incumbents what you just don't know, and it just fell into place very well. And that was definitely a highlight of my legislative experience, certainly.
Yeah. Last rapid fire question. If you could visit any country in the world, where would you go?
Australia, I believe. Would be. There's so many I'd like to go to. Scotland and Ireland. I've been to Germany, but I'd like to go to Italy. Yeah. Certainly the Holy Land.
Oh yeah.
Israel and that we were gonna do that one time, but then during COVID you had to have the vaccinations, and then there's some rockets came flying over. My wife and I said, let's just not right now. This isn't the recent one. This was back some time ago. So so those are the ones that I'd like to go to, but definitely Australia. I just think it would be so fun to go down there.
I've got to ask you this. Our country was founded on an understanding of the importance of religion. You see references to it in the Declaration of Independence, but you see references to it even more than that as you go and study history. Do you think it's important to have godly influence on decisions that are made?
Oh, absolutely. I think our whole system falls apart if we don't have some moral standard of how to treat people, but understanding human nature, and not just going with whichever way the breeze is blowing in the different times of different
Right. Climates.
climates. So I think that is a foundation that you have to have. And usually when I have a bill before me, it's like, okay, is there a moral issue here? No, there's not. Is it a liberty issue?
Right.
Somebody's individual rights.
Yep.
And so that's my next one. And then, is it really good for the state? And
Yeah.
so I kind of prioritize it in those areas. And if it doesn't hit those, it's just whatever, seems to be the best way to go.
Yeah. Right.
Or maybe it's not, maybe it's just kind of a quick idea that somebody had that isn't well vetted, then
Right.
you can get rid of it. But so I look at it from those standards.
Yeah. You mentioned that. I asked this question once before. Do you think the legislature, should act reactively or proactively on issues? Because morally, there's a lot of issues that are creeping up in the world that we live in, and we see them happening more common in other states and other cities. Do you think it's important for the legislature to act proactively so it doesn't come into North Dakota, or we think it'll be squashed? Or do you think it's better to be reactive when it's actually a problem?
Well, I think it depends on the issue, certainly, but it's always better to be proactive if you can see ahead of what might be coming, and especially if it's detrimental to the state. Sometimes there was an additive that was put in fuel in California years ago to oxygenate it. Then they realized that only a small amount could contaminate a huge amount of water. So they did a knee-jerk reaction by oxygenating for the environmental reasons, and found out it was really not good for the environment.
Gotcha.
So we had a bill once that said we're not going to allow that to be used. And I said, well, this is dumb.
Yeah.
Because we already know it's never going to be used because nobody's going to use it now.
Right.
And but we put the bill in to be, in that way we were proactive, I guess. But
Yeah.
it was so, it was more, it wasn't substance, it was more symbolic.
Right, yeah.
And sometimes that's frustrating. But there's certain things, I think, issues with the culture wars that we have now, the pronouns and all that. Yep. I know we got a lot of criticism for, putting in all this stuff that it's not here yet. And I thought, well, first of all, we're not the ones that started pushing this. We didn't just come up with reasons that we're going to deny people. It was when they're starting to force their way into locker rooms, female sports, into the restrooms and all that stuff, that we finally, basically had to step up and say, no, we're not going to let that happen here. If it's happening at all, we're going to try to cut it short to protect our women and our children and all that. So that was I think reactive to some extent, but it wasn't that we just thought of something in the middle of the night and never heard of it coming to other, being involved in other states. So
yeah, that's good. Talk about the state politics for a moment. Republican Party has undergone a lot of change. We've seen a change in the chairman of the party, and now we see a lot of change in some of the key leadership of the governor, saying he's not running for the third term. You have Kelly Armstrong, you have Tammy Miller running for that on the Republican side. Obviously, that means that there's competition at the House spot as well. Do you feel like the state of the Republican Party is in a good, stable position? There's been infighting. It's been an interesting last 4 years for the Republican Party, and now we're seeing a lot of change at the state level. Mm-hmm. Do you feel like the Republican Party is stable, or is this a time where Republicans need to buckle down a little bit?
Well, I think it's pretty stable. Obviously, that exchange of ideas is happening, and maybe to a larger extent now. Yeah. Maybe the people that are on the side now that are starting to get some control in some places that they didn't have before are seeing more success. So now all of a sudden it seems like it's a bigger deal than it was. Yeah. But I mean, North Dakota, the Republican Party has very deep benches for all positions, for the most part. We'll see how the legislative ones play out. But as far as statewide, I mean, there's always somebody ready to step in. If we had, as you saw with the governor position opening up, then Kelly Armstrong said, well, I'll come back to the state. And so he stepped in, very strong candidate, and now he has a challenger. Right. And of course, then there were several people jumping in for his spot. So, we have deep bench for any of the higher positions that go up. Legislators have moved up into the statewide places like Tom Beadle and Michael
Yep.
Howe. So, I think, and then with the PSC is always kind of a position where some will stay there quite a while, but then that's when they'll move up if there's another position that's available and they have the desire to do, like Julie Fedorchak is doing. So I think, I think it's pretty stable. I think we're still in control overall. It's just that there's a little bit of a tug of war right now in some of those areas, and we'll see how that plays out.
There's only 2 candidates on the Republican side for governor. Room for a third? You think about doing that?
No, no. And my wife wouldn't let me if I even reach the idea a little bit or broach the idea. I jokingly said that one time, and she's like, "No, I'm not moving to Bismarck, and no, you're not running for governor."
It's not happening.
No, not at this time. I'll never say never, but it's not.
I get that.
It's like the legislature never aspired to it, but then the timing was right, and somebody asked in the right way, and I made the decision. But I don't have any aspirations for that.
Let's end it with another hot topic issue. We started with term limits. Let's end it with property tax.
Okay.
There's a lot of sparks flying around this issue right now. Obviously, we've seen the constitutional amendment that has been put out by Dr. Rick Becker, trying to eliminate it. And now recently we saw a representative from Minot, Scott Lauser, put out some legislation saying that he was going to be providing some legislation that would amend it to the legislature. First off, is property tax an issue that needs to be addressed? And then second off, should it be done through another constitutional amendment, or is it something that should be taken care of in the legislature?
Well, we've tried it. I'll answer that first one, or the last one first. But we've tried to come up with some type of property tax replacement reform, what have you. And really the only ones that we could come up with were either funding it to some extent and buying down mills, or potentially capping some of the growth of the political subdivisions to certain levels without going to a vote of the people. And if it went higher, they'd have to go to a vote of the people. Those have generally failed. Yeah. So I don't know that it can happen in the legislature. So I think probably an initiated measure or a constitutional measure is a way that's going to have to happen. I know Scott tried a bill in the past about funding education. This one has some provisions I like, some I don't. That I haven't had a chance to talk to him about, but there's some things that I probably won't support it in its current form. If that measure passes, some of the questions I have yet with it in reading it is it does prevent the raising of taxes, property taxes based on valuation. Okay. Well, currently farmland isn't based on valuations, based on production. Okay. So I'm not sure if it even helps lower the or eliminate the farm ag land taxes. Yeah. So that's one question I'd have about it, and sounds to me like it still allows for a property tax, just not based on valuation of the commercial and residential property. Right. So then what? Is it by square footage? Is it by linear feet? I mean, you don't know. So it sounds to me like it may still allow for a certain type of property tax that's going to be raised locally, right? Which maybe is a good way to go, because one of the things people have such a frustration is when their valuation of their home goes up, right? And of course that is a problem at times, because when the local political subdivision has a higher valuation, then they can get more dollars without ever having to vote, because they can keep the mills the same. And they get a stealth tax increase. Right. Now, if they would lower the mills every time, or maybe that's a reform we should have, is every time the valuation goes up, there has to be a reduction in mills. Then you could see a flat, leveling, and then they could then have to vote to raise the mills back up. The state sometimes creates problems for that too, because some of the political subdivisions, if they lower mills below a certain level, they don't get certain funding. Okay. For I think there's some school funding that is that way, and I think maybe for some of the social services. So there's some disincentives for the political subdivisions to lower the amount of mills they're applying. based on even if their valuation goes up. So there's where it's kind of a flawed system. So I think going away from a valuation standard is probably a good idea, but I don't think we're going to go away from a property tax, in some form ever the way it looked.
Do you think it's an actual problem? Do you think it's something, or is it something that we should just expect to pay? Because I say that because it seems like there's a lot of residents that, and I know it is part of what you were saying, where it's based on the evaluation, it's based off the mills increase. Some budgets both happen in the same budget, and so that you feel double the raise. Is there something we actually need to change though, or are we fine with how property taxes are going about as now?
Well, I think people want to change somehow, especially away from the valuation. But the main issue everybody says is we have to get the people more involved. But then when they have their meetings, their budget meetings, nobody shows up. So it's we can tell people that we're going to set it up so that people are more involved in what happens with their taxes. But then if they don't show up to talk about it, but I mean myself right now, I don't like to see the valuation go up for assessed value, because I know it's going to probably affect the tax that I'm going to have to pay. But nobody hopes their value of their property goes down in other ways. And the other problem is if you improve your property, it's a disincentive to improve your property, because now you're going to get hit.
Or you improve your property without nobody knowing, which also isn't great.
Well, and I found out the problem there. I mean, I tore down an old garage and then added a new garage, new shingles, new siding, and did a lot of that work myself. But boy, now my house has raised by $21,000 in value.
Oh no!
2 years in a row.
Oh, wow! Yeah, time to sell.
Apparently, well, and that's a problem. Is a lot of people don't plan to sell. It's not like an investment for them.
No,
so
it's not.
I improved it because first of all, it needed new siding,
right?
And
that's where you live.
I added on the roof, so I had with the garage, I had to redo the shingles. So, does it look nice? And I'm happy with it. I did most of the work myself too, and with some help from my boys and others. But now I'm hit with some higher property tax.
We all feel it. If someone wants to support you in your run once again in District 38, what would be the best way to get a hold of you?
Well, I don't have a website, but I have a Facebook site that's basically just my personal one, as well as do anything that I would post that might be political. I just do off of that one page.
Very good.
My phone number is on the state website. That's my personal cell phone. So they go to the legislative page. They can get my direct phone, and I'm always at work if they know the company I have, and I won't push that, but they can come and talk to me in person all the time.
Awesome. Sounds good. Well, I really appreciate you joining us today.
I enjoyed it. Thanks.
Absolutely. This has been another edition of the Dakotans Election Central, where we are comprehensively covering the 2024 North Dakota election cycle. I'm Jonathan Starr. Be sure to go to mydakotan.com, click Election Central. There you'll find interviews just like the one you just watched. You'll be able to get information on all the candidates that are in races this year. It's a great resource for you as you make decisions this election cycle. Be sure to follow us on Facebook, like and subscribe on YouTube. Become part of the Dakotan community. Appreciate you watching this video. Thank you, and have a great day.